Hey everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to do my April wrap-up, and April has been the month of the magical Readathon first semester of Orilium, and I am proud to say that I finished all the prompts for that, even though I did that on the last day of the month. So I didn't have a lot of time to spare, but still very proud of myself. I will talk about that a little bit more during the end as well. But first of all, let's go through the books that I finished in April. Now, the first book I finished did not count towards the first semester of Orilium, but was still for my character, and that was The 12 Kings of Sharakai by Bradley Beaulieu. I never know how to say his name. But it is a desert fantasy, but fortunately I did not like it. This book I was very excited about. I had only heard amazing things about it, and I was very intrigued to go into it. Now, I found it in my library, so I read the German translation, which is always a bit scary because German translations can be really bad, and when I started reading the book I was immediately worried because the writing style wasn't great. But what ultimately made me dislike the book is not the writing by itself, but just the characters, which I could not connect to at all. They never felt real to me in the slightest. And then also just the whole world building, that's usually what people praise about this book. But I found it to be so boring, very unimaginative. So I was thinking the whole time while I read this book whether I was reading a different book. I don't know. So that was very unfortunate. But if you're interested, The 12 Kings of Sharakai follows mainly the character of Jade, who is a character seeking revenge for her mother's death, but there is like lots more to it. And there's these 12 kings who rule the city, and she's trying to kill the kings because they are responsible for the death of her mother. Yeah, as I said, it just didn't work for me, and I don't want to like bash it anymore. It just wasn't for me. But with that, I had completed my character for Orilium, so I thought it would be perfect to go into the first semester and try to become Archmage, because my character is in the House of the Arcane, and this career of the Archmage is, what do you call that? It's restricted to the House of the Arcane, like only people who are in that house can become an Archmage. So I thought that would be quite fun. The next book I finished also wasn't for the readathon. It was my audiobook, which I had brought over a little bit, and that was Jade by Fonda Lee. I'm doing a separate reading vlog for the whole series, which I'm almost done, so I can hopefully share it soon. I'm very excited for it because this series is a lot. Now, this first book I decided to give like a weak 4 stars to. I think it is definitely a bit of a setup book where you get to know the characters, you get to know the world and how the magic works and stuff like that. And there is one thing in this book that I think is very courageous of the author, something you don't really see a lot in books. And I think it worked in a way, like it definitely sets up the tone for the series, and you're like, okay, this is what I get here. But it also made me struggle a little bit with the book because it just threw me off a little bit, and I had a little bit of problems with the second half of the first book to like really get into it. But then the ending is like very good again, and it gets very intense. So yeah, it was a little bit of a bumpy road with me in Jade City, but overall I think it's a very well written book and definitely deserves the 4 stars. Then the first book for the readathon was Wild Women and the Blues by Denny S. Bryce. This is a book that has been on my list of books where I was like, why haven't I read this in 2021? It was a new release that I was so excited about, but then just never get around to reading it for some reason. So I had made this a high priority to pick up. It was then on my winter TBR, and I again did not read it. So I thought I have to read it now. It's getting ridiculous. And so I did. I read this for Artificery, a book with an Earth setting, because this is historical fiction set in the 20s in Chicago. We follow a woman called Honoré, and yeah, she wants to be a famous dancer. She grew up very poor and wants to work her way up, but things happen and she gets into way more trouble than she thought she could, basically. This was a book that was kind of disappointing to me. As I said, this was a new release I was super excited about, and in the end, it just ended up being a 3.5 star read for me. I think the now timeline did not work at all for me personally. It kind of spoiled things of the then timeline, which no. And yeah, I think the author also tried to put like a twist into it, but then the twist also didn't really work for me. And you can see that in the, what is it called, epilogue, where we do a weird jump into the 40s, I think. And that just shows you that the two timelines don't work. They don't make up a whole, basically. They're just separate weird things existing. I did really enjoy the then timeline. I really liked Honoré as a main character, and I think that her storyline was interesting. It was just very different from what I expected, because I went into this thinking that it would be more about the glitz and glam of this time, but it was definitely more about violence and mobsters and stuff like that. So 3.5 stars, it's not bad, but it's also just not as good as the cover promised me. Then the next book I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. I read this one for Alchemy, a book with a romance. I'm not a romance reader, so I thought this one would fit quite well, because it definitely deals with the romantic relationship of two people, Marianne and Connell, but it's not like a traditional romance with a happy end and a nice bow and stuff. So yeah, this book I was very hesitant to read. It was also an intimidating read in a sense, even though it is quite short, but so many people love it and so many people don't like it. So I was afraid that I would be in the don't like group. But actually I did enjoy it. I did not love it, and I gave it 4 stars in the end. I'm definitely a little bit too old to be intrigued by this, even though I think that Sally Rooney is kind of my age. I'm not quite sure, because this is set a little bit in the past as well. But the main characters in here are in their 20s, and I gotta be honest, I'm glad I'm not in my 20s anymore. So yeah, I just always felt a little bit like reading about things I'm glad I don't have to deal with anymore. This was also a lot more dark than I thought it would be. Like, Marianne's storyline is really, really dark if you think about it. And she actually suffers through a lot, and she definitely needs help. I thought that I was a little bit disappointed that these things weren't really dealt with, and even though you can see that it's not like Sally Rooney is saying like, oh, this is great, just a normal life, but it's also not like, I don't know, I just felt like it should be dealt with a little bit more. I did enjoy Connell as a character more. I wanted to see more of the class discussion with his character, because I feel like it is mentioned here and there that there is a class difference between him and Marianne, but also between him and his fellow students when they go to college. But yeah, it's just mentioned. It's not really dealt with. You sometimes get these like little feelings he has, but I felt like it was only ever brought up when it had something to do with their relationship, but it wasn't dealt with as a thing on its own. Like, what does it mean to be of a lower social class and go to a very prestigious school? You know, stuff like that. So yeah, I just felt like there are a lot of interesting themes in here, but they're not really dealt with. They're more like mentioned, and the focus is like very much on their weird relationship, which is a lot of like miscommunication trope. So I can totally see why some people really don't like this book. Oftentimes people say they are annoyed that it is not, I don't know what these things are called in English, but you know, basically little things you have when people talk in books, and she doesn't use those. I didn't mind that. I think, yeah, since English is not my first language, I am used to getting stuff just from context. So I thought it was always pretty obvious if someone is talking or whether it's a normal sentence. The character I loved the most in this is Lorraine, and I would love to read a book about her. She's my queen. Then the next book I finished was Jade War by Fonda Lee, and this one is the second book in the Queenbone saga, and I counted it for Conjuration, a book with a source of light on the cover because my cover has a lightning. This is the second book in this series. I'm not going to talk a lot about it here, but it's amazing. I also gave it 4 stars, but it was leaning towards 4.5. So yeah, very high stakes, very thrilling, but also like lots of political intrigue and machinations and stuff like that. And I think if you get attached to the characters in the first book, then the second book will be so much better. So yeah, really enjoyed that. As I said, very strong 4 stars. And then the next book I finished was the Philosophy in the Bedroom by Marquis de Sade. Now, I read this for Intimidating Read, that was Inscription, and this one is an interesting book because if you know Marquis de Sade, it's basically the person where the word sadist comes from, and he wrote philosophical text mixed with smut in the 1700s. I think the late 1700s. So yeah, that's basically what this is. It's people having orgies and talking about philosophy. And I was really intimidated by the size of this, but it actually has the biggest font ever. So I originally wanted to count this for the tome topple, but this is just a weird version that has 800 pages. All the other versions I found were like 200 to 400 pages. So it doesn't really count for a tome topple, I think, but that's fine. You know, I don't have to participate every single time. This book is interesting. If you like Penny Dreadful, the 3rd season with Lily, Dorian Gray, and Justine. If you enjoy that storyline, it is based on this book. So even though the main character in this book, we have multiple main characters if you're like, yeah. But the main character's name is different. It's not Justine. Justine is the most famous book by de Sade. But the whole plot of like 2 libertine people educating a young girl, bringing her up in their ways, that's basically what this book is. And I found the similarities very interesting. I love Penny Dreadful. It's one of my favorite shows. So yeah, it was very interesting to see like what they took from it and how that influenced the storyline in the show. Now for the book itself, it is written in dialogue, so basically like a play, and I would have enjoyed it more if it would have been like a normal novel. I think I gave it 3 stars in the end, yes. I felt like the philosophy that is discussed in here is definitely interesting to challenge your thoughts, but it also goes very far. Like this discusses what freedom is basically, but it doesn't distinguish between the freedom to be and to do whatever you like and the freedom to hurt others with it. That's basically the same thing for these characters. And I would strongly caution that those are 2 different things. And I do not agree that murder is not a crime and should be allowed. But as I said, it is interesting to read this just to challenge your thoughts and to think about these things more. It's also very harsh on religion, Christianity, and yeah, it's written in a political time in France when they had just they were just getting rid of the monarchy basically. So that's the kind of context for the philosophy in this book. So it is an interesting classic, and I think it is very easy to read. So if you want to check it out. Okay, my camera just died, so I hope this isn't too different from what we just had. So then on the last day of April, I finished 2 more books. I finished my library book, Conjure Woman by Afia Atakora. I read this one for Art of Illusion, a book with a trope you like, and this one has a bad omen trope, but also other tropes I really enjoyed. Now, Conjure Woman is the story of a small community of black folks, and we follow them mainly after the Civil War, after slavery has been abolished, but we also get some flashbacks to the slavery time. And it slowly unravels the kind of lies and secrets that especially our main character Rue has to just keep her community safe in a way. Now, our main character Rue is the healing woman of this community, and she also does some hoodoo, maybe, we don't really know, but her mother was the healing woman and doing hoodoo before her during slavery time. And we also get a good glimpse on their relationship, like the mother-daughter relationship, in that very unique circumstance. And I really, really loved this book, I must say. It also has the trope of having a more nature-based mythology versus Christianity, because with Rue we have that kind of hoodoo healing nature, like very plant-based healing and stuff like that. And with another character that comes to this town or community, whatever you could want to call it, he is trying to bring kind of a new form of Christianity, because up until that point, faith has been used to put the slaves into place. But now obviously that faith has to evolve and fit the kind of freedom time. And I thought it was so interesting to see this community struggle with that idea of freedom, just an idea of life that they didn't really have before, and they didn't really know what to do with it now that it was there. They just stayed on the plantation they had been working on before, and it has so many themes in it. It's obviously very, very brutal because it deals with slavery time, so keep that in mind. It also deals a lot with giving birth and problems with that, because Rue is the healing woman and she helps the woman birth their children. And with that child with the black eyes, that is the bad omen. His name is Bean. We also have things like sickness of children and stuff like that. So if you're sensitive to these themes, I would definitely recommend not reading this book. There's also an incident of rape in this book, and I'm not gonna say more. It's always hard to differentiate between content warning and spoilers, but if you're sensitive to anything having to do with pregnancies and childbirth, rape, or any kind of murder or torture. I don't know why that just went out of my head. If you're sensitive to any of these things, then I would not read this book, but it is very, very good. It's very well written, and the last 100 pages are just amazing. All the unraveling of the secrets and lies and how the puzzle pieces fit together. Absolutely love that. It was done so well. It has so many complex relationships. That's what I love in books. I gave it 5 stars. It was my favorite read of the month, and I would highly recommend it. And then the last book I finished was listening to The Orchestra by Susan Hill. I read this one for Spells and Incantations, which was short stories. And Susan Hill is the person who wrote The Woman in Black. That was also a movie with Daniel Radcliffe, and I loved that story of hers. And I also read a collection of horror short stories by her, which I really enjoyed. This book I found in a used bookstore. It's a very short book. It has 4 stories in it, and they're not horror, but they are kind of unsettling. I really enjoyed this. I gave it 4 stars. I think that Suzanne Hill is a very, very good writer. I really do enjoy her style of writing and her themes, and yeah, just the way she builds up the suspense in her stories. I think she's really good at that. I must admit that the first story I did not get at all, but the other 3 were really good. Especially, I think the third one. It's called Elizabeth, and that one was my favorite. I gave that story 5 stars. It also had to do with like finishing Conjure Woman on the same day. I felt like the themes were kind of overlapping a little bit there. It does not deal with slavery, but just with yeah, the troubles of women in the broadest sense. So yeah, I really, really enjoyed this. 4 stars. And that finished my Archmage prompts. So that's all the books that I finished in April. I would love to hear what you have read, if you participated in Magical Readathon. I also tried to participate in Linguathon, but for that only the book by Marquis de Sade counted, because that was a classic in translation, was translated from French. So yeah, unfortunately I could only add 1 book to that. But I still had a great reading month. I was very, very busy, so I'm very pleased that I managed to read so many things. Let me know how your reading went, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!